The Mystery and Romance of Alchemy and Pharmacy. By C.J.S. Thompson. 1897. Part 1. Chapter 4. The Fathers of Medicine. Though Aesculapius is said to have lived so near to the time of the Trojan War, yet the Greeks knew very little about him. The superstition of the time gave him a position among the gods, and as he was adored under the character of the genius of physic, it came at last to be doubted whether he was ever immortal. Consequently his priests were obliged for their own sakes to make themselves masters of all the physic that the master could teach. That they might be qualified to give advice to those who applied to them, their prescriptions passed for the suggestions of the gods, the cures for the miraculous. But both diseases and remedies were carefully recorded. Strabo tells us that from these registers in the temple of Aesculapius at Kos, Hippocrates formed his plan for a proper diet. Hippocrates, the wise physician and father of medicine, was according to Cyranus the son of Heraclides and Phaenaretes, descended from Hercules and Aesculapius. He was a Cone by birth, and was first instructed by his father, and then by Herodicus, and Democritus of Abdua, the philosopher. He flourished at the time of the Peloponnesian War, and after being instructed in physic and the arts, left his own country for Thessaly, where his fame soon became known, even as far as Persia. He was sent for by Perdiccas, king of Macedonia, who was then thought to be consumptive, but Hippocrates diagnosed it to be a disease of the mind, and soon cured the king. He is also said to have delivered his own country from a war with the Athenians by prevailing upon the Thessalians to come to their assistance, for which he received great honors from the Cones. He taught his art with great candor and liberality to those who were desirous to learn, and at length died full of honors, it is said, in his 90th year, and was buried between Girton and Larissa. A quaint old tradition states that at his tomb a swarm of bees settled and made their honey for a long time, with which children troubled with aphthous, anointed by their nurses at the grave, were easily cured. He was by no means covetous of money, but grave in his behavior and a lover of Greece, as appears from his curing those of that nation with the utmost diligence, and freeing many of their cities from the plague, for which he acquired great honors. At first the art of healing was accounted a branch of philosophy. So that the cure of diseases and the study of nature owed their rise to the same persons. Among the many philosophers skilled in the art the most celebrated were Pythagoras, Empedocles, Democritus, and Hippocrates of Kos. After them came Diodes the Carystian, Praxagoras, and Chrysippus, with Hierophilus and Erasistratus, many of whom practiced their art in entirely different ways. At this period physic was divided into three schools, the first cured by diet, the second by medicines, the third by manual operations. Those who treated by dietetic methods endeavored to extend their views farther with the assistance of natural philosophy. Then came Serapion, the apostle of practice and experience, and afterwards Asclepiades, who worked a revolution in medical science as then practiced. The knowledge of both surgery and medicine even in the time of Celsus is very remarkable, and many of the forms of administration of medicine are employed at the present day. The enema was largely used by the ancients. A common one being hydromel, described by Dioscorides as being made by mixing 2 parts of water to 1 of honey. Seawater was also employed for the same purpose, and Celsus recommends the copious drinking of hot water as a laxative remedy. Asclepiades was the originator of massage and friction, and in his book of general remedies describes his treatment, which is similar to that performed today. Poultices of meal of various descriptions were commonly employed, linseed or fenugreek being the favorite media. Asclepiades studied in Alexandria, and after practicing in Greece and Asia Minor, finally settled in Rome in the early part of the 1st century BC. Here he soon met with success, and established a reputation for great skill. He was the physician and friend of Cicero, and probably also the instructor of Lucretius in the Epicurean philosophy, of which he was an enthusiastic advocate. He believed the body to be composed of atoms or particles, with spaces between, through which, like a sieve, various atoms of other shapes were continually passing in and out of the body. In practice he believed in curing his patients with as little discomfort as possible, which doubtless helped to make him popular. He was averse to the employment of violent remedies and the excessive use of emetics and purgatives so much favored by his fellow practitioners. He advocated the use of music as a soothing agent, and was strongly in favor of bathing frequently and of massage. He strongly believed in wine as a remedial agent, which it has been said may have accounted for his popularity with the Roman ladies, with whom as a physician he was in great demand. He lived to a very advanced age, and died it is stated from the effects of a fall. Galen, born at Pergamus in the year AD 131, studied in the school of Alexandria, which then had a considerable reputation, and there he formulated his system of treatment founded on his knowledge of anatomy and on observation. His fame having spread abroad, he traveled to Rome and became physician to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. According to Galen, the health of the body depended on an equal and uniform mixture of solids and liquids, and its sickness arose from their inequality. Consequently, the physician should foresee illness. He was a profound student of anatomy in his early career, and afterwards turned his attention to physiology. His views as to inflammation, intermittent fevers, and his system of antipathies and sympathies, place him very much above his predecessors. In the beginning of the 5th century, says Lacroix, the practice of medicine, like that of surgery, which was not yet a distinct branch, continued to be free without any authorization being required. There were even women who, like the druidesses of the Gauls, treated the sick. Charmers, unconscious, no doubt, of the occult forces which they set to work, attempted to cure neuralgic pains, country bone setters to mend fractured limbs, while oculists and impostors of the worst kind traveled the country. It was not until the close of the 8th century that a regular course of medical instruction was founded, the first of the kind being organized at Salerno, in the kingdom of Naples. Alexander of Tralles, a noted physician, flourished in the middle of the 6th century. No Greek doctor equaled him since the days of Hippocrates in regard to his knowledge of his art in those primitive days. He is said to have possessed to a high degree the art of diagnosis, and he laid down as a principle, that no decision should be arrived at as to the treatment of a case until the specific causes of disease had been carefully considered. His depreciation of violent aperients, his views on melancholia and gout, and his generally common-sense treatment, stamped him as a man of superior attainments and ability. He was the first to resort to bleeding from the jugular vein, and to use iron in certain diseases affecting the blood. It must not be imagined that the Roman practitioners of medicine were ill paid, for it is recorded that Sterdamus made some £6,500 a year, and Caney, a surgeon, is said to have received £2,000 for one operation, which contrasts well with fees of modern times. Votive offerings for health to the Roman deities were frequent, and sometimes consisted of land, animals, coin, jewelry, and other articles. Other bribes which have been discovered near ancient shrines are terracotta figures of deities, human beings, animals, and also portions of human anatomy, such as the liver or stomach. This superstition still exists, and is practiced in many parts of Italy, the peasants making votive offerings similar to those of 2,000 years ago. The object of offering models of various portions of the body to special deities was doubtless to propitiate the god to heal that special part in which the patient believed his complaint originated. This custom of making offerings to the gods, called donaria by the Romans, originated at a very early period. They often took the form of land, buildings, cattle, tools of trade, jewelry, and cast-off clothes. Thus the temple of Artemis Broronia was filled with women's clothing. In the temples of the healing gods, instruments of surgery, pharmaceutical appliances, painted tablets representing miraculous healings, and great numbers of models of various parts of the human frame, composed of metal, stone, and terracotta, were deposited. Many of these ancient temples of healing were magnificent buildings with richly decorated interiors, while others were simply shrines or grottos at the source of some hot spring or mineral water, where hundreds of those afflicted with various ailments flocked to bathe or drink the water. The priests in charge regulated the use of the waters and prescribed for the patients. After completing the course, it was customary for the patient to throw an offering into the water, in the form of a silver cup, a coin, or some terracotta model of a limb, and then drag himself off, muttering a prayer. Others would hang their gifts on the walls, or deposit them at the feet of the statues of the gods placed around. Magnificent offerings, such as goblets of valuable metal with votive inscriptions, have been occasionally found, and other ornaments of gold and silver. It is said, however, that denarii of precious metals were after a time melted down and disposed of by the priests. Grateful patients or surgeons sometimes offered surgical instruments as a thanksgiving for a successful surgical operation. Thus it is stated Erostratus offered to Apollo in the temple of Delphus a forceps of lead, to show how little he approved of the fingers as a medium for extracting teeth. Doctors Sambon, Aller, and others, who have discovered a large number of denarii of the Etruscan and Roman period, found among the pottery, invalid feeding cups and feeding bottles for infants. Many of the latter were modeled in the form of the female breast, and others in the shapes of animals. These articles were often placed in the tombs of young children who had died in babyhood, instead of the dishes of various foods which were deposited in the tombs of adults. Among other denarii discovered are models of the limbs and viscera of the human body in clay, showing upon them the marks of the various diseases from which the votaries had suffered. Thus the ancient temples must have presented a curious appearance, festooned on walls and ceilings with these numerous models, all of which told a tale of human suffering. Chapter 5. The Early Age of Greek and Roman Pharmacy. Rome at an early period gave birth to several philosophers and practitioners in the art of healing. Cornelius Celsus, who is thought to have been a Roman, was a much esteemed writer of the time, and his works on medicine show the advanced state of surgery and medicine during the Roman Empire. His work on medicine gives a considerable insight into the pharmacy of the Romans in his day. With reference to their weights, he says, would have it understood that in an ounce is contained the weight of 7 denarii, next, that I divide each denarius into 6 parts, that is, sextants, so that I have the same quantity in the sextans of a denarius that the Greeks have in their obolus. Of the methods of administration employed in early Roman pharmacy, the malagma was commonly used. It was a kind of soft mass composed of herbs and grass beaten up to the consistency of a thick paste, and applied to the skin. Numerous formulae for malagmas are given, in which pellitory, myrrh, resin, cardamoms, ammoniacum, galbanum, etc., are included. Their malagmas corresponded with our ointments. They also used plasters, of which the basilicon, of galbanum, pitch, resin, and oil, in an improved form, has survived 2,000 years. Troches, for healing wounds, were composed of dry medicines held in suspension by some liquid such as wine or oil. Pessaries, vaginal, were originated by the Greeks, who called them pessi. The ingredients were placed in a piece of wool, and thus used. Powders and snuffs were also common methods of administration. Antidotes for bruises, bites, and poisons were regarded as extremely important. One was called ambrosia, which Zopyrus is said to have compounded for the king Ptolemy, another was the celebrated antidote of King Mithridates. The Greeks called their embrocations or ointments euchrista. The catapotia was the method used for internal administration in liquid form, for which many recipes are given by Celsus. The following will serve as an example: Athenios catapotia for a cough. Myrrh, pepper, each, castor, poppy tears, each, which are bruised separately and afterwards mixed. For venomous bites, the treatment of the ancients, if the wound was severe, was first cupping, or, if slight, the plaster of Diogenes was applied, or a salt fish bound over the wound. A curious remedy practiced by the Greeks for hydrophobia was to throw the patient suddenly into a pond. And if he could not swim, let him sink several times, and thus drink. If he can swim, keep him down at times until he may be satiated with water, for thus at once, writes Celsus, is both the thirst and the dread of water removed. Their antidote for nearly all poisons was warm oil, given in order to induce vomiting. The word collyrium, now applied to a lotion for the eyes, was also used by the ancients, but they gave it a greater latitude, and also employed it to describe a composition of powders wrought to a pasty consistence with a liquid, and formed into something like a tent for insertion into cavities. Of the chemical bodies and drugs known both to the Greeks and the Romans, the number is not a few. Cinnabar, which seems to have been known from a very remote period, was the name applied to the red sulfate of mercury, and also to dragon's blood. It is doubtless of the latter Pliny says, he believed to be the gore of a dragon crushed by the weight of a dying elephant, with a mixture of the blood of these animals. Copperas, lead, alum, copper, and iron were used as styptics. Myrrh, frankincense, cardamoms, linseed, isinglass, and cobwebs were used as astringents. Galbanum, storax, bitumen, are recommended for promoting suppuration, while pennyroyal, sulfur, pellitory, stavesacre, ox gall, scammony, rue, and opium were all included in their medical recipes. Dioscorides was the first to attempt to record in anything like a methodical manner the many drugs and chemical substances used by the early Greeks. Pedatian Dioscorides, born in Anazaba in Cilicia, was a Greek physician, who lived in or about the 2nd century. He gathered a great portion of his information on materia medica during his travels with the Roman army, which he accompanied on several expeditions in the capacity of physician. Afterwards he wrote his great work Perihules Iatrix, about materia medica, which for 15 centuries or more remained one of the chief authorities on that science. It treats of all the medicines then in use, with their preparations and action as then known. The work of this early physician first appeared in a Latin translation in 1478, the first Greek edition being published in 1499. The work was afterwards translated into Spanish, Italian, French, German, and Arabic. In describing the papaver sativum and its virtues in this work, he says, it is not improper to subjoin the method in which the opus or juice of it is collected. Some, then, cutting the poppy heads with the leaves, squeeze them through a press, and rubbing them in a mortar, form them into troches. This is called meconium, and is weaker than the opus. But whoever desires to gather the juice must proceed thus: after the heads are moistened with dew, let him cut round the asterisk with a knife, but not penetrate through them, and from the sides cut straight lines in the surface, and draw off the tear that flows with his finger into a shell. And come again, not long after, for it will be found standing upon it, and the day following it will be found in the same manner. Hence the old name poppy tears. Dioscorides was also learned in the preparation of wool fat, which he calls oesopum, known to modern pharmacists as lanolin. He says, oesopum is the oily part collected from sordid wool. Thus, the wool was washed in warm water and all its swords expressed, the fat floated with a froth, and upon throwing in some sea water it subsided, and when all the oesopum was obtained from it in this manner, it was purified by repeated effusions of water. When pure it had no sharp taste, and was in some degree astringent and appeared white, and was emollient and filled up ulcers. Recent excavations made at Pompeii and Herculaneum have thrown some further light on various articles of materia medica as it existed in the days just preceding the destruction of those cities. Aloe seems to have been held in high esteem by the practitioners of the time, and was employed, we learn from the historian, in 29 diseases. It was prescribed in doses from 1 to 111 drachmas, about 68 grains. And mixed with wine was employed to stimulate the growth of the hair. Aconite, we find, was used in 4 diseases, and was supposed to be an antidote to any poison which might exist in the system. Other remedies mentioned include gum acacia, colocynth, elaterium, gold, silver, copper, and elecampane. It is further recorded of the latter drug, that Julia Augusta, daughter of Augustus Caesar, used to eat the root daily. Of the vegetable remedies about 150 are enumerated, and of these the cabbage seems to have held a prominent place. Other favorite medicines were rye, garlic, anise, mallow, rose, and lily. In the animal kingdom, the remedies contributed were numerous, being mainly the various parts of man and beast. Among some of the least disgusting, hair, blood, and saliva may be mentioned. Scrapings from the bodies of athletes, mixed with the oil with which they anointed themselves, were used as a tonic. The hair of a man torn from the cross was used as a remedy for quartan fever. The hyena was employed as a medicinal agent in 79 diseases. And the crocodile, chameleon, lion, elephant, camel, and the hippopotamus all contributed certain curative agents. Wolf fat was held in great esteem. Of minerals, iron, leah, nitrum, salt, gold, tin, silver, realgar, copper, and myci, a combination of the sulfates of copper and iron, are enumerated. Most of these articles are mentioned by the second Pliny, who was killed during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius which buried Pompeii. Thus ends chapters 4 and 5 of the mystery and romance of alchemy and pharmacy. Up next is chapter 6, Alchemy, the Alchemists. If you liked the video, consider subscribing. And, as always, feel free to head over to Weird Audiobooks, where you will find a plethora of unique selections.